On a bitter February morning in 1998, in a forgotten corner of Ohio's Rust Belt, a young woman named Angela Petrov walked out of her apartment to start her shift at the local diner and never came home. Her keys were found in the ignition of her unlocked car. Her purse sat on the passenger seat. A single coffee cup, still warm, rested in the cup holder. The engine was off, but the radio played softly, a love song from the 80s crackling through worn speakers. Angela was 23 years old. She had plans to visit her sister that weekend. She'd promised her mother she'd come by for Sunday dinner. For 26 years, her family asked the same question over and over, the words wearing grooves into their souls like water over stone. Where did Angela go? Youngstown, Ohio, in 1998 was a city that had learned to live with loss. The steel mills that had once made the Manning Valley pulse with prosperity had shuttered their gates more than a decade earlier, leaving behind skeletal factories and a population that couldn't quite remember how to hope. The downtown streets, once crowded with workers carrying lunch pails and dreams, now held more pigeons than people. Storefronts wore plywood like band-aids over wounds that wouldn't heal, but life continued in the neighborhoods. People still woke before dawn. They still made coffee in percolators passed down from their grandmothers. They still believed, in that stubborn way that defines working-class America, that tomorrow might be better than today. Angela Marie Petrov lived in one of those neighborhoods, a cluster of brick apartment buildings on the south side, where landlords didn't ask too many questions and rent was paid in cash when it could be paid at all. She occupied a second-floor unit in a building that had seen better days, where the hallway smelled of old cooking oil and pine sol, where children's voices echoed off tile floors worn smooth by decades of footsteps. Those who knew her said Angela was the kind of person who remembered everyone's name. She worked the morning shift at Rosie's Diner on Market Street, a place where truckers and factory workers who'd found jobs in nearby Warren would stop for eggs and toast before facing another day. She'd started there 6 months earlier, after her previous job at a dry cleaners went under. The owner, Rose Kowalski, said Angela never missed a shift, never complained, always had a smile ready, even when her feet ached and the tips were thin. Angela lived alone, but not by choice. She'd grown up in a large Polish family, 3 sisters, 2 brothers, a constellation of cousins who gathered for every holiday and holy day. Her father had worked at the U.S. Steel plant before it closed. Her mother cleaned houses in the nicer neighborhoods across town. They'd raised their children to work hard, to stay close, to weather any storm together. Clear's throat. February 19, 1998, began like any February morning in northeastern Ohio, dark, cold, and threatening snow. The temperature hovered at 28 degrees. A thick cloud cover pressed down on the city like a gray ceiling. Angela's alarm clock went off at 4:30 in the morning, the way it did every weekday. Her shift started at 5:30. It was a 20-minute drive to the diner if the roads were clear. Her neighbor in the apartment across the hall, an elderly woman named Dorothy Simmons, would later tell investigators that she heard Angela's door close at 4:57. She knew the time precisely because she always woke early and she always checked her clock. "You get to be my age, you don't sleep much," she said. "I heard her lock the deadbolt. She was always careful about that. I heard her footsteps going down the stairs, light and quick, the way young people walk when they're running a little behind." The parking lot behind the building was poorly lit, just one streetlight that flickered more than it shone. Angela's car, a 1991 Honda Accord with rust eating through the wheel wells, was parked in her usual spot, 3rd row from the building. Security footage from a nearby gas station would later show her headlights pulling out of the parking lot at 5:03 a.m. She never made it to work. At 5:45, Rose Kowalski called Angela's apartment. No answer. At 6 o'clock, she called again. By 6:30, Rose was worried. Angela had never been this late. Angela had never been late at all. Rose called Angela's mother, Helena Petrov. Helena said she'd check with Angela's sisters. By 7:15, when no one had heard from her and none of Angela's family could reach her by phone, Helena Petrov called the police. The dispatcher took the information but offered little comfort. Adults missing for a few hours rarely merited immediate concern. "Give it 24 hours, the dispatcher said. "She probably just had car trouble or went to see a friend." But Helena Petrov knew her daughter. Angela didn't just not show up. Angela didn't just disappear. At 8:30 that morning, a jogger named Thomas Brennan was running his usual route through Mill Creek Park, a sprawling urban forest on the city's north side. The path he took wound through bare trees and over frozen ground, past the frozen lake, and through sections of the park that felt miles away from civilization. He was approximately 3 miles into his run when he spotted something that didn't belong. A car sat in one of the small parking areas off the main road, a lot typically used by hikers and birdwatchers in warmer months. In February, these lots were almost always empty. The car was a light blue Honda Accord. The driver's door was slightly ajar. Brennan approached cautiously. He could see that the car was running or had been running recently. He could hear the faint sound of a radio. He came closer. The car was unlocked. The keys dangled from the ignition, turned to the off position but still in place. A brown leather purse sat on the passenger seat, its contents visible. A wallet, a tube of lipstick, a crumpled tissue. In the cup holder, a styrofoam cup from a convenience store, the coffee inside still giving off wisps of steam in the cold morning air. Thomas Brennan later told investigators that he'd called out, thinking perhaps the driver had stepped into the woods to relieve themselves or had gone for a walk. "Hello? Anyone there? Your car door's open." His voice echoed through the bare trees. Nothing answered but silence and the distant caw of crows. He looked around the immediate area. No footprints led away from the car in the frost-covered grass. No signs of a struggle. No broken glass. No blood. Just an abandoned car with the radio playing soft rock and a cup of coffee growing cold. Brennan called 911 at 8:47 a.m. When Youngstown police arrived at 9:15. They ran the plates. The car belonged to Angela Marie Petrov. They called it in. Within minutes, the dispatcher connected the dots. Missing woman, missing car, both now found. The woman still missing. Detective Robert Marchetti was assigned to the case. He was a 20-year veteran of the department, a broad-shouldered man with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. He'd worked dozens of missing persons cases. Most ended with someone turning up embarrassed after a night of bad decisions. Some ended with a body. A few never ended at all. When Marchetti arrived at Mill Creek Park at 10:30, the scene had already been cordoned off. Crime scene technicians were photographing the car from every angle. The coffee cup had been bagged as evidence. The purse, the keys, everything photographed and cataloged. Marchetti walked a slow circle around the vehicle, his breath clouding in the cold air. He noted the door, hanging open like a mouth caught mid-sentence. He noted the lack of defensive marks on the door frame or interior. He bent down and examined the ground around the driver's side. The frost had been disturbed where the door hung open, but the pattern was wrong for a struggle. It looked as though someone had simply gotten out of the car, or been pulled out. Clear as throat, he opened the passenger door and leaned in without touching anything. The coffee was from a Speedway station. The receipt was still in the cup holder. 5:01 a.m., 1 medium coffee, $1.09. Angela had stopped for coffee between leaving her apartment and disappearing. The radio was tuned to an oldies station. The volume was low. Marchetti imagined Angela driving in the Predawn darkness, sipping her coffee, probably thinking about the day ahead, about the tips she might make, about what she'd do on her day off. Had she noticed headlights following her? Had she pulled over for some reason? Had her car made a strange noise that prompted her to stop? He examined the ignition. The keys showed no signs of having been turned roughly or forced. The car had been turned off normally, deliberately. Marchetti's partner, Detective Linda Chen, arrived shortly after 11. She was younger than Marchetti, sharp-eyed and methodical. They'd worked together for 3 years. She walked the perimeter of the parking lot, examining the entrance and exit points. "One way in, one way out," she observed. If she drove in here, someone either got in with her or someone followed her in. By noon, search teams were assembling. Youngstown police brought in K-9 units. Volunteers from Angela's neighborhood began arriving, bundled in winter coats, their faces grim with determination. Helena Petrov arrived with Angela's sisters, Katrina, Natalia, and Sophia. They stood in a tight cluster, holding each other against the cold and against the terrible possibilities that hung in the air like fog. The dogs picked up a scent trail leading from the car toward the woods, but it dissipated after approximately 50 feet. Either Angela had been carried or she'd gotten into another vehicle. The searchers spread out through the park, calling her name. Angela. Angela, the sound of her name bounced off the frozen trees and faded into nothing. They found nothing. No torn clothing. No signs of blood. No footprints leading anywhere meaningful. It was as if Angela Petrov had simply evaporated, leaving behind only her car, her coffee, and her keys in the ignition. As the sun began to set on February 19th, the temperature dropped into the teens. The search was called off until morning light. The volunteers dispersed slowly, reluctantly, as if leaving the park meant admitting defeat. Helena Petrov refused to leave. She stood by her daughter's car, her hand resting on the cold metal of the hood, and wept. Part 2. The investigation by dawn on February 20th. The search had expanded to include over 200 volunteers, state police, and search and rescue teams from 3 counties. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging flew grid patterns over Mill Creek Park and the surrounding areas. Divers prepared to search the frozen lake once the ice could be safely broken. Every abandoned building within a 10-mile radius was checked. Every creek bed, every drainage ditch, every patch of woods. The media descended. Local news vans from Youngstown and Warren parked along the roads leading into the park. By the afternoon, stations from Cleveland and Pittsburgh had sent crews. Angela's photo appeared on the evening news. A young woman with dark hair and dark eyes, smiling at the camera, unaware that this image would become her poster, her memorial, her frozen moment in time. The community response was overwhelming. Rosie's Diner became an unofficial headquarters for volunteers. Rose Kowalski kept the coffee brewing around the clock. People brought sandwiches, thermoses of soup, hand warmers, and flashlights. Flyers with Angela's photo went up on every telephone pole, in every store window, on every community bulletin board within 50 miles. Tips began coming into the police hotline. Someone thought they'd seen her at a truck stop outside Cleveland. Someone else reported a woman matching her description at a bus station in Pittsburgh. Every lead was followed. Every lead went nowhere. Detective Marchetti spent the first 72 hours of the investigation barely sleeping. He interviewed everyone who knew Angela. Her coworkers at the diner described her as reliable and kind. Her friends said she had no enemies, no angry ex-boyfriends, no one who would want to hurt her. Her family painted the picture of a young woman trying to build a life in a city that offered few opportunities. But as Marchetti dug deeper, he found something that troubled him. Angela had been worried about something in the weeks before her disappearance. Her sister Katrina mentioned it almost in passing. She seemed nervous the last few times I saw her. I asked if everything was okay and she said yes, but she didn't look me in the eye when she said it. A coworker at the diner, a woman named Bate Morrison, reported something similar. About 2 weeks before she went missing, Angela asked me if I'd ever felt like someone was watching me. I asked her what she meant, and she kind of laughed it off, said she was just being paranoid. But she started walking to her car with one of us after closing shifts. She never wanted to walk out alone. Marchetti interviewed the staff at the Speedway station where Angela had bought her last coffee. The clerk who'd been working that morning, a young man named Derek Walsh, remembered her. She came in pretty much every morning around 5, Always got the same thing, medium coffee, 2 creams, 2 sugars. That morning she seemed normal, maybe a little distracted, but normal. The security footage from the speedway showed Angela entering at 5:01 a.m. She wore jeans, a puffy winter coat, and her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She poured her coffee, paid in cash, and left. The footage showed her walking to her car alone. No one appeared to be following her. She got in her car and drove away, heading north toward Mill Creek Park. Her route to work should have taken her south on Market Street, straight to the diner. Mill Creek Park was in the opposite direction, at least 6 miles out of her way. Why had Angela gone to the park? Clear's throat, Detective Chen pulled Angela's phone records. In 1998, cell phones were far less common, and Angela didn't own one. Her landline showed normal call patterns. Regular calls to her mother, her sisters, a few friends. The last incoming call had been at 9:30 the night before her disappearance, from her sister Natalia. The conversation had lasted 12 minutes. Natalia later told investigators they'd talked about their mother's upcoming birthday and what to get her as a gift. Marchetti expanded his search to Angela's apartment. With Helena Petrov's permission, he and Chen conducted a thorough search. The apartment was small, tidy, spare. The furniture was second-hand but well-maintained. Bills were stacked neatly on the kitchen counter, most marked paid. In Angela's bedroom, her bed was made with care. A photo of her family sat on the nightstand. In the drawer of that nightstand, Chen found something. A folded piece of paper, creased from being folded and unfolded many times. On it, written in Angela's handwriting, was a name, Michael Torrance. Below the name, a phone number. Below that, one word. Why? Marchetti and Chen looked at each other. They ran the name through their database. Michael Torrance was 38 years old, white, with an address in Boardman, an affluent suburb south of Youngstown. He had no criminal record. He worked as a manager at a manufacturing plant. He was married with 2 children. And according to records, he had no apparent connection to Angela Petrov. On February 22nd, Marchetti and Chen drove to the Torrance residence, a well-maintained ranch house in a neighborhood of similar homes, all with manicured lawns hidden beneath February snow. Michael Torrance answered the door wearing business casual attire, khakis, and a button-down shirt. He was of medium height with thinning brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses. His handshake was firm. His expression was confused. "Mr. Torrance, I'm Detective Marchetti. This is Detective Chen. We're investigating the disappearance of a woman named Angela Petrov. We'd like to ask you a few questions." Torrance's face showed no recognition. "Angela Petrov? I don't know anyone by that name. What is this about?" They showed him Angela's photo. He studied it carefully, then shook his head. "I'm sorry, I've never seen her before. Is she missing?" "She disappeared Thursday morning. We found your name and phone number in her apartment." "Can you explain why she would have that?" Torrance looked genuinely baffled. "I have no idea. I don't know this woman. Maybe she got my number from someone else. I don't understand." His wife, Sarah Torrance, appeared in the hallway behind him. "Michael, who is it?" "It's the police. They're asking about a missing woman. They found my phone number in her apartment, but I don't know her." Sarah Torrance came to the door. She looked at the photo. She also shook her head. "We don't know her." "Is there some mistake?" Marchetti asked Torrance where he'd been on the morning of February 19th. Torrance said he'd been at home until 7:30, then driven to work. His wife confirmed this. His employer confirmed he'd arrived at his office at 8:15. His secretary confirmed he'd been in meetings from 9 until noon. The timeline didn't work. Angela had disappeared between 5 and 8:30 a.m. If Torrance had left for work at 7:30, he couldn't have been at Mill Creek Park. Marchetti asked if he could search Torrance's vehicles. Torrance consented. They examined his car, a sedan clean and well-maintained, and found nothing. No evidence of Angela, no signs of struggle, nothing. They left the Torrance residence more confused than when they'd arrived. Why had Angela written Michael Torrance's name and number? Why the word why? Deputies whispered quietly among themselves during briefings. Something about the case felt wrong. Not just the lack of evidence, but the nature of the disappearance itself. The abandoned car with everything inside. The coffee still warm. The door left open as if Angela had intended to return in just a moment. And the location. Why had she driven to the park? On February 25th, a week after Angela's disappearance, a witness came forward. A man named Gerald Hoffman told police that on the morning of February 19th, he'd been driving past Mill Creek Park on his way to a construction job. The time was approximately 5:40 a.m. He'd noticed a car in one of the parking lots, a light-colored sedan. What caught his attention was that another vehicle was parked very close to it, nose to nose, as if the two drivers were talking to each other through their windows. "I didn't think much of it at the time," Hoffman said, "but when I saw the news about the missing girl and her car being found in that park, I realized it might have been her. The thing is, I remember thinking it was kind of odd because it was so early and so cold, and who meets in a parking lot at that hour?" Marchetti asked Hoffman to describe the second vehicle. Hoffman said it was a dark-colored SUV or large car, possibly a Suburban or Explorer. He hadn't gotten close enough to see the license plate or identify the make and model with certainty. He couldn't describe the driver. The lead was promising but led nowhere. Police checked registrations for dark SUVs in the area. There were hundreds. Without more specific information, the vehicle couldn't be traced. As February turned to March, the searches continued, but hope began to fade. The park had been scoured. The lake had been searched by divers. Abandoned buildings had been checked and rechecked. Angela's face stared out from posters that grew weathered and torn in the March winds. Marchetti interviewed Michael Torrance twice more. Each time, Torrance maintained he didn't know Angela. His alibis held. His wife supported his account. His coworkers confirmed his whereabouts. Yet Marchetti couldn't shake the feeling that Torrance was connected somehow. The note in Angela's apartment was too specific, too personal. On March 15th, nearly a month after Angela vanished, the active search was scaled back. Marchetti and Chen continued to follow leads as they came in, but the case was growing cold. The news moved on to other stories. The volunteers returned to their normal lives. The posters faded. Helena Petrov refused to give up. She and her daughters maintained a volunteer search every weekend. They walked the trails of Mill Creek Park. They searched along roads and through fields. They knocked on doors and asked if anyone had seen anything, heard anything, remembered anything. But Angela remained gone. The park held its secrets. The winter gave way to spring, and the question remained, hanging in the air like morning mist. What happened to Angela Petrov? Part 3. The silence. In May of 1998, 3 months after Angela disappeared, Detective Marchetti received a phone call that would haunt him for years. It was Sarah Torrance, Michael's wife. Her voice was tight, controlled, as if she were holding back something enormous. "Detective Marchetti, this is Sarah Torrance. I need to talk to you about my husband." They met at a coffee shop far from the Torrance home, far from anywhere Sarah might be recognized. She sat across from Marchetti, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup she never drank from. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She'd lost weight. The composed woman who'd answered the door in February had been replaced by someone who looked like they were barely holding themselves together. "He's lying," she said quietly. "Michael is lying about something. I don't know what exactly, but he's lying." Marchetti leaned forward. "What makes you say that?" "He's been different since that girl went missing. Nervous. He checks the news constantly. He barely sleeps, and he started," she paused, choosing her words carefully. "He started being very careful about where he goes, what he says. It's like he's always watching himself." "Has he said anything about Angela Petrov?" "No. Never, but here's the thing. I found something in his office at home. A receipt from a speedway station on Market Street. It was dated February 19th. The timestamp was 5:17 a.m. Marchetti felt his pulse quicken. "May I see that receipt?" Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to Marchetti. It was a gas receipt. Station address: Market Street, Youngstown. Date: February 19, 1998. Time: 5:17 a.m. Transaction: $28.45, regular unleaded. He told you he left for work at 7:30 that morning, Marchetti said. Yes, he always leaves for work at 7:30. His office is 20 minutes away, so why was he getting gas on Market Street at 5:17 in the morning? Have you asked him about this? Sarah shook her head. I'm afraid to. I'm afraid of what it means. But detective, that gas station is only a few blocks from where that girl worked, isn't it? At that diner. It was. Marchetti felt the pieces of the puzzle shifting, though they still didn't fit together cleanly. Michael Torrance had been near Angela's workplace at 5:17 on the morning she disappeared. Angela had been at a different speedway, farther north, at 5:01. She'd then driven to Mill Creek Park. The timeline was tight but possible. Marchetti brought Michael Torrance in for questioning again. This time the conversation was different. Marchetti laid out the timeline, the gas receipt, the proximity to the diner. Torrance's demeanor changed. He became defensive. So what if I got gas that morning? That doesn't mean anything. I couldn't sleep, so I went for a drive. I got gas. I drove around for a while. Then I went home and left for work like I said. Why didn't you mention this drive before? Because it didn't seem relevant. I didn't see anything. I didn't do anything wrong. Did you see Angela Petrov that morning? No. Did you follow her to Mill Creek Park? No. I don't even know where Mill Creek Park is. But Torrance was sweating now. His hands trembled slightly. Marchetti could see the fear in his eyes. Michael, I need you to tell me the truth. How did you know Angela Petrov? For a long moment, Torrance said nothing. Then quietly, I didn't know her, I saw her sometimes at the diner. You went to the diner? Sometimes. Early before work, I'd get coffee. You told us you'd never seen her before. I lied. I was scared. I knew how it would look. A married man, a missing girl, but I swear to God, I had nothing to do with her disappearance. I just knew her from the diner, that's all. Marchetti didn't believe him. But without physical evidence, without a body, without witnesses, there was nothing to charge him with. Michael Torrance walked out of the police station that day, and the case remained cold. Sarah Torrance filed for divorce in July. Those who knew her said she'd never been the same after that conversation in the coffee shop. She moved with her children to Columbus, cutting all ties with Youngstown and with her husband. The years passed slowly for the Petrov family. Helena converted Angela's bedroom into a shrine, keeping everything exactly as her daughter had left it. The bed made with care, the photo on the nightstand, the clothes hanging in the closet waiting for someone who would never return to wear them. Angela's sisters struggled in different ways. Katrina threw herself into activism, working with organizations for missing persons. Natalia became withdrawn, speaking rarely about her lost sister. Sophia, the youngest, developed insomnia. She would later tell a therapist that she couldn't shake the feeling that Angela was trying to tell her something, that some message was waiting to be heard. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt the gnawing suspicion that something terrible has been hidden, you understand the particular torture of living with uncertainty. The Petrov family existed in a state of suspended grief, unable to mourn properly because there was no body, no confirmation, no end to the story. Detective Marchetti retired in 2005, but he never stopped thinking about Angela Petrov. He kept a file at home, copies of reports, photos, notes. Every few months, he'd take it out and review everything, looking for something he'd missed. His wife would find him at the kitchen table late at night, papers spread before him, his face haggard with the weight of unsolved questions. Clear his throat. In 2012, Michael Torrance remarried. His new wife knew nothing of Angela Petrov or the investigation. Torrance had moved to a different suburb, taken a job with a different company, constructed a new life on top of the old one. But secrets are like bones buried in shallow graves. Eventually, the earth shifts. In 2015, 17 years after Angela vanished, Torrance's adult daughter from his first marriage, Emily, contacted the Youngstown police. She was 28 years old. She'd been 11 when Angela Petrov disappeared. She had something to say. Part 4. The revelation. Emily Torrance sat in an interview room at the Youngstown Police Department on a gray afternoon in November 2015. She was accompanied by her attorney and a victim's advocate. The detective assigned to meet with her was Jason Rivera, a younger officer who joined the force years after Angela's disappearance, but who'd studied every cold case in the department's files. Emily's hands shook as she spoke. She'd been carrying this burden for 17 years, and it had nearly destroyed her. "I saw something that morning," she began. "February 19, 1998. I was 11 years old. I woke up early, I don't remember why, and I looked out my bedroom window. I saw my father loading something into his car, something big wrapped in a blue tarp." Rivera leaned forward. "What time was this?" "It was still dark, maybe 6:30. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I thought he was taking trash to the dump or something. But later, when those detectives came to our house asking about that missing woman, my mother started acting strange. She started questioning my father. They'd fight late at night. I'd hear them through the walls. Did you hear what they fought about? Not everything, but I heard my mother say, 'What did you do, Michael? What did you do?' And I heard my father crying. I'd never heard him cry before." Emily stopped, collecting herself. The advocate placed a hand on her shoulder. "After my parents divorced, my mother told me something. She said my father had been obsessed with a woman who worked at a diner. She said he'd followed this woman, that he'd been lying about where he was going. My mother suspected. She suspected my father had done something terrible." "Did your mother ever report this to police?" "No, she was scared. She didn't have proof, and she didn't want to believe it. I think part of her hoped that if she just left him, if we just moved away, it would all go away. But it didn't go away. It's been with me every day for 17 years. Emily began to cry. Through her tears, she said, "I think my father killed that woman. I think what I saw him loading into his car that morning was her body." The case of Angela Marie Petrov was officially reopened on November 20th, 2015. A new team of investigators, led by Detective Rivera, and including a forensic specialist and a cold case expert from the FBI, began reviewing every piece of evidence with fresh eyes and new technology. They started with Michael Torrance's vehicle from 1998. Through DMV records, they tracked the car, a dark blue Ford Explorer, to its current owner, who'd purchased it at auction in 2003. The SUV had changed hands 3 times since then. The current owner, a mechanic in Cleveland, still had the vehicle in his garage, partially disassembled for restoration. The forensic team descended on that garage. They tore apart the interior, examining every fiber, every stain, every molecule. And in the cargo area beneath the carpet padding, in the grooves of the metal floor, they found it. Blood. Not much, just trace amounts, but enough. DNA testing confirmed it was Angela Petrov's blood. They also found carpet fibers that matched fibers from the blue tarp Emily had described. The tarp itself was never found, but the fibers were a match to a specific brand sold at hardware stores throughout Ohio in the 1990s. On December 8, 2015, Detective Rivera obtained a warrant for Michael Torrance's current residence. Torrance was at work when the police arrived. They searched his home, his vehicles, his office. In a storage unit rented under his name, they found boxes of old papers. Among those papers, they found a journal. The journal was damning. In entries dating from 1997 and early 1998, Torrance had written about a beautiful woman at the diner who doesn't notice me. He wrote about following her, about learning her schedule, about fantasizing about talking to her. The entries became darker as they progressed. In late January 1998, he wrote, "She'll never love someone like me. No one ever has. Maybe they never will." On February 18, 1998, the day before Angela disappeared, he'd written a single line. "Tomorrow, everything changes. Michael Torrance was arrested at his workplace on December 9, 2015. Security footage from the lobby showed him being led away in handcuffs, his face pale, his eyes wide with shock. He said nothing. The media response was immediate and intense. The Angela Petrov case, which had faded from public consciousness, exploded back into headlines. Cold case breakthrough, man arrested in 1998 disappearance. The story spread across Ohio, then nationally. Angela's face appeared on news broadcasts once again, accompanied by photos of Michael Torrance being led into court. The community of Youngstown reacted with a mixture of relief and horror. Relief that there might finally be answers. Horror at what those answers revealed. Those who had volunteered in the searches nearly 2 decades earlier gathered at vigils. They held candles and shared memories of those cold February days when they'd walk through the park calling Angela's name. Helena Petrov, now 71 years old, appeared at a press conference alongside her daughters. She was smaller than in the photos from 1998, her hair completely white, her face deeply lined. But her eyes burned with the same fierce determination they'd always held. "For 17 years we've lived without answers," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "For 17 years we've wondered where our Angela was, what happened to her if she suffered. We still don't have all the answers, but we have hope now, hope for justice. Hope that the person who took our daughter from us will finally be held accountable." The investigation continued. Despite finding Angela's blood in Torrance's vehicle, despite the journal entries, despite Emily's testimony, there was still no body. Prosecutors knew that cases without bodies were difficult to win. They needed more. In January 2016, investigators returned to Mill Creek Park. Using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs, they searched areas that hadn't been thoroughly examined in 1998. The technology had improved dramatically in the intervening years. On January 23rd, in a heavily wooded section of the park roughly 2 miles from where Angela's car had been found, the dogs alerted. The team began to dig. 4 feet down, they found bones wrapped in deteriorated plastic sheeting. The sheeting had once been blue. The remains were identified through dental records as Angela Marie Petrov. The medical examiner determined that she'd been struck on the head with a blunt object, causing fatal trauma. She'd been dead before she was buried. Michael Torrance's trial began in September 2016. The prosecution presented their case methodically. The blood in his vehicle, the journal entries, his lies to investigators, his daughter's testimony about the tarp, the gas station receipt placing him near the diner at 5:17 a.m., the forensic evidence linking him to Angela's remains. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial. They claimed that Emily's memories, recalled after 17 years, were unreliable. They suggested that Angela's blood could have gotten into Torrance's vehicle through innocent means. They painted Torrance as an awkward man who developed a harmless crush, nothing more. But the prosecution had one more piece of evidence. Cell tower records from 1998, re-examined with better technology, showed that Torrance had received a call on his cell phone at 6:43 a.m. on February 19th. The call had pinged off a tower near Mill Creek Park. Torrance had been at the park that morning. His timeline, that he'd driven around then gone home, was a lie. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. On October 3, 2016, they returned a verdict, guilty of murder in the first degree. Michael Torrance showed no emotion as the verdict was read.